Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this IITPSA Women in IT and Social Ethics Committee webinar, where we will be chatting with Ineke Botter. As we've said in the introductions, industry veteran of the mobile industry who's been involved in mobile communication since the early 90s. And she's had many interesting and very varied postings. And recently she published a book about her experience as a mobile CEO in a wide variety of countries. And that book's called Your Phone, My Life. And just to tell you how I know Ineke, in my very first job at KPN, the incumbent telecom operator in the Netherlands. I started working there in 1991, 1992. And already then Ineke was working there and working at KPN Business Development. I was based in the office, but Ineke was the globetrotter. And I always greatly admired her for all the work she's done. So I'm very honored to have her here in this webinar. So I also want to welcome the members of the Women in IT chapter and the other members of the Social Ethics Committee, and also our CEO, Tony Perry, who's also keeping an eye on the chat. So we'll be going through some topics in Ineke's book, and we'll combine them with some ethical issues. Because if we think about it, and that's also what will come about when discussing Ineke's book, is that what we've witnessed over the past 30 years has been a mobile revolution. And today we're talking about the fourth industrial revolution and the AI revolution, like we're at the beginning of it. And sometimes we seem to forget that we've witnessed an actual revolution over the past 30 years. And I think since we're dealing with other revolutions and believe we are at the beginning of it, and maybe you can only understand it during a revolution in hindsight, we thought it would make a lot of sense to chat to Ineke about some of the things that she's come across in this mobile revolution, and what ethical principles were at play there, to learn how we can maybe apply them today. So first of all, hello Ineke, how are you doing?
Hi, Yusine. Thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation as well. It's an honor to speak to your IT institute, of course. And I'm very happy that we have also a chance to discuss a bit about the contents of the book, not only about, let's say, the technical part of mobile, because there are plenty of books about that. But this, as far as we know, is the first book that describes the history of how we did it in actual fact. So I'm very glad that I contribute today.
Okay, fantastic, thank you. Yeah, so and I want to make clear, so I've read Ineke's book, and I must say it's fast-paced, it's interesting, and it actually gives you a bit of a combination of both. So it does talk about the technology, but much more about the actual revolution that is taking place, and it makes for riveting reading. It's really special. So we chatted about it before. Ineke's book starts with a chapter on actually what mobile technology is, but we decided that to discuss that during a webinar would probably take up the whole hour. So for now, I think Tony will be putting a link in the chat where you can first find out more about the book, but also to a YouTube video that in a quick 6-7 minutes explains the mobile technology revolution. But Ineke did indicate, or Ineke, you did indicate that one thing that's very important to understand when talking about mobile, that we need to understand our frequencies. So if you maybe could explain that a bit more to us.
Okay, so frequencies are organized by WARC, which is the frequency organization group in the ITU, the International Telecommunications Union, one of the oldest bodies in the world, actually. And that union, apart from doing frequency division, if you will, also deals with numbering. So it's very important institute. And if you look at frequencies, the frequencies are going up from megahertz to gigahertz, and the bands, of course, going up also with the generation that you're looking at. So if you see here 1G was an analog system and operated in the 450 megahertz band. And you got, as an operator, you got a block of frequencies. And within that frequency block, you have to, of course, manage the frequency within your frequency plan. And that plan then is also managed by the Frequency Institute in each and every state. And the frequency goes up. So if we look at the 1G in the 450, then it goes up to 2G, 900, then it goes to 2.5G, 1800, then it goes to 3G, to 2.1 gig. So it goes up and up. If you don't have a frequency, of course you have no network. Therefore, I say it's gold dust. Without frequency, there is absolutely nothing. Yeah, people are talking about their phones, but no, the basis of all this is the frequency and the networks that are using this frequency to make sure that you can use your phone. And that is how it works. And I think, it's very important to understand that there was not only a big revolution, as you say, but also that there was a division in the world. Yeah, if you look at the Western world and the communist world, were not supposed, because of the Cold War, they could not talk to each other. And how did they manage that to prevent people talking to each other was that the management of the frequency was totally different in the West and the East. Yeah. So when we started to build networks in the East, those frequency blocks that we needed had to be freed up, mostly for military use, into commercial use for us. That has taken a bit of time, and that was a very cumbersome exercise at the beginning of the 90s. But once the wall fell in Berlin, of course, and all the satellite states to the USSR became independent around 92. So you see in the early 90s, these frequencies are freed up and we can start building networks.
Okay. No, wonderful. And that actually takes us straight into part of your history. So throughout the webinar, we'll be looking at the interesting postings that you've done. So the first part of your postings is you started in Ukraine in 1991, where you were still active, or where you successfully managed to hunt for a mobile license. You then moved on to Hungary, and where also you obtained a mobile license and start the network operations there, actually built the network and the organization. And from there you moved to the Czech Republic, to Prague, as a member of the board of directors for Eurotel, and also with the responsibility for all wireless projects for Czech Telecom.
The shareholder, yeah.
Yeah. So when we talk about the revolution, let's see what it is that we're actually talking about in numbers. There we go. So as you can see here on the slide, it talks about 1991, where we sit at 1 million analog mobile handheld phones on the planet. You'll see the numbers for today. But maybe you want to chat a bit more to us about that, Ineke, especially about that fascinating.
Yeah, what you see here, this picture is very interesting though, because we all assume that mobile was only available from the 80s, which is true. But this picture is a very funny picture. It's taken from the Ericsson collection, and we basically draw it ourselves. But here, this is Mr. and Mrs. Ericsson, who are putting a stick up to the cables of the fixed network and then connect them to a phone in the car. And as you can see, that is the 30s. Yeah, and they make a connection. So it is even much older, and that is just for fun to show that it is not new. But if you see the revolution, as we call it, it started indeed in the 80s, late 80s. And the countries that were very well advanced was, of course, Japan had a system that was a system developed by Panasonic, and that was one of the first ones up. And then Saudi, yeah, which is also strange, but Philips worked on a system for Saudi Arabia. But the most important thing for the Western world was really NMT, the Nordic operators that developed this 451G, yeah, and also developed a roaming between themselves, because the Scandinavian countries were thinking on how can we have a strong position in the world, and with Ericsson in Sweden, of course, Nokia was not there yet. They wanted to expand on that. So you see that Nokia bordering to Russia falls apart, the USSR falls apart, and I worked in the Ukraine when it was still Soviet Union. That is also very interesting, but it falls apart, and then Nokia is sort of sitting on its thumbs and thinking, what can we do? And then they start also the technology for mobile networks and mobile handhelds. So there is a huge movement, and in those few years, 91, we assume 1 million analog mobile handhelds that are actually mobile, because you had also stationary versions of that, but there are not very good statistics on that, so I couldn't find them. But if you look today, these figures that you present here are from the book. I checked them, and even today this is already much more, right? Okay. So we are now looking at subscribers, meaning mobile users, of 5.5 billion with a population of 8 billion. If you then rule out babies and old people, then probably everyone has a mobile phone, yeah, or two. 10 billion connections, that includes also IoT, of course, Internet of Things connections, which is a much cheaper transmission way, but it works for machine to machine, for example. So it's very important to look at that as well. The mobile industry, which is I said in my book, sort of hidden, and no one knows, except if you work in a mobile operation, but then still you don't have the global view. But it's a bit hidden, it's a bit not out in the open, except for the GSMA. The GSMA is our institute, based nowadays in London, and has, let's say, satellite organizations all over the world in the very important cities, for example, Hong Kong, Singapore, Dubai, I'm sure also Joburg, I'm not sure, but I think so, Cairo, and so on and so on. But that is really for research within the mobile industry, and they do a lot of research, especially, well, we'll see later maybe in the presentation about, who is using and for what. And then I would like to say that the mobile industry also provided nowadays 30 million jobs, and that is directly, but if you look indirectly, you can multiply it by 10. So it is a huge industry, and we pay all in all $500 billion in taxes worldwide. So the contribution, and especially the London School of Economics did a lot of research at the beginning, in the 90s, and I used that research very often for presentations and conferences and so on. The economies were growing by 5-6% per year, and that is still the case because your mobile is basically your mirror. Whatever you do is in your mobile phone. Yes. So it still grows and it still expands the service portfolio. Okay.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you. And at the time when you were in the Ukraine, so we said that this was 1991. Were you aware that you were actually at the beginning of a huge revolution like this?
Yes, but I say yes for me, because a lot of people were not aware. So we as business development teams, we had to struggle to get funds. And it was, one time it was so bad that we personally spent a lot of money on building an organization, and we needed our money back. And they said, oh, well, we don't think that this will be a success, with the exemption of the Scandinavian countries. And I worked a lot with them. So the CEO of Telia, which is Swedish Telecom International in those days, said by the end of the century, 1 in 4 people will have a mobile phone, and everyone who travels has a mobile phone in his backpack. And the other ones say, well, that's ridiculous. But if you think about it, it is not ridiculous at all. And we believed in this revolution very much so. Yeah, we even stuck our own money in it. Because if you look at the political systems, which are very important to realize in what political system you basically work. Because under communism, the waiting list for a phone, a fixed line phone, was like 17 years. And then you had to be a nurse, a doctor, you had to be a politician. Otherwise, you would not even be on that list. So forbidden to talk is something which is very hard for people. And the minute that we could provide mobile phones, and even if they were still expensive, people were running to get them because it gave them freedom. And that was a very important thing. Then later on, of course, maybe I'm not jumping about 7 or 8 years, the fact that you don't have to walk places, but that you have a phone and you can call people. So the fact that connecting people, said Nokia, we use the slogan always there. Yeah, that is the success of the mobile phone. I don't have to sit behind my desk, wait for a phone call. I have freedom. Yes. I have freedom to speak and freedom to move.
Okay, no, wonderful. Ineke, we seem to have lost your camera. I can still hear you well, but also for the people watching, just be aware, because I saw it freezing on my side, and I just hear from Tony, it's also on his side. So I don't know what the issue there is, but I think it's most important that we can at least hear you. So this is, the revolution. And I think, like you already said, it's interesting to look at, the number of jobs it provides, and we'll get back to that a bit later. Ineke, are you still with us?
She's dropped off, Jessine.
Okay. So then let me, in the meantime, let's hope she'll come back quickly. And in the meantime, welcome the people who've joined later, and please be aware that this webinar is being recorded. We shared some links in the chat. The link to the website for Ineke, Your Phone, My Life. We've shared a link to the IITPSA Code of Ethics. We'll talk about that a bit more as soon as Ineke comes back. And let me see if, okay. Okay, let's see. Let me send her a message to find out what's happening. Otherwise, in the meantime, we can go on and describe what countries next. So after Ineke's adventure in Central and Eastern Europe, in Ukraine, Hungary, and Czech Republic, she then moved on for postings in Sweden. I've highlighted the countries here. So first Sweden. No, sorry, other way around. She started in Switzerland, from there moved to the Netherlands, and from there to Sweden. And I think it's important to remember what we spoke about in the beginning with regards to the frequencies, is that at that time the frequencies came available to make 3G communication available. So mobile operators were now hunting for licenses from governments. It started in the UK, but also in Switzerland, the Netherlands, and Sweden, to get their additional frequency packages to make that possible. And governments either did that via auctions, so that's where operators were bidding, or beauty contest, and that's mostly what's being done by richer governments. But although most governments were looking at how can we make as much money as possible from the sale of these frequency licenses. The interesting story about the work that Ineke did in Switzerland is that there, and so we'll hopefully when she comes back, we talk about it later, when she talks about the getting of the IT skills. In Switzerland, the Orange, that was a mobile operator at the time, got the GSM 1800 band license, And that meant that to build that network, they needed a lot of radio engineers, who were not at all available in the country at the time. So that's what she was busy with in Switzerland. From there, she moved to the Netherlands, and actually the home country for the both of us, and participated in the auction for the 3G license. And from there, she went up to Sweden, that also started 3G, and that was for Hutchinson Whampoa. I'm going to check if maybe I get a message. No connection. I'll have to share with you. So Ineke is today calling in from Kampala in Uganda, where she is currently based. So maybe something happened there with the connectivity. So let me, if you allow me, I'll send her.
I am
Sorry.
back.
Oh, fantastic. I'm happy to hear.
I'm sorry, but we have these problems here all the time, like you have problems in South Africa. We have plenty of those as well.
Okay.
I'm sorry,
great.
the video doesn't switch on, but
Okay.
at least you have connection.
Okay, fantastic. I've just shared with the audience so that we already spoke about the work you did in Switzerland, the Netherlands and Sweden with the 3G operations. Already touched a bit on the fact that in Switzerland, one of the big issues was that you couldn't get enough radio engineers, but that will come back to that a bit later. So, and please, for the audience, if you've got any questions to Ineke, just put them in the chat. I'll keep my eye on it for that. But I think that the next item that we wanted to chat about, so this revolution, has changed the world as we knew it before. So from the 80s to the 90s. And you've worked, so you already hinted at that a bit in former communist countries for a couple of years. Then you moved to Western Europe. And if you see, what would be the differences? And that's maybe what we're looking for here if we relate it back to an ethical principle.
The differences between Western Europe and Eastern Europe?
Yes. So, because we...
It is a very different situation. Yeah, the starting point, of course, is, as I explained, a long waiting list in the Ukraine, but that was not only in the Ukraine, that was like everywhere in the world, with the exemption of the Western world. So in the Western world, people have a fixed line, 97% penetration. The mobile phone is very nice and very handy, and I always have it. But the impact of having a mobile phone in the former East Bloc was much and much bigger. Yeah, so the general take on that is that people for the first time had the freedom to move and to talk, as I said, and that contributes, of course, to the well-being of people. But it didn't go all by itself, because initially it was quite expensive, and the first persons that you will always have in your network are criminals, pimps, all kinds of new money, if you will, because they buy basically the service. But later on, this started to be a commodity. And once it starts to be a commodity, especially when we introduced prepaid cards as well, whereby you could load your phone with a small domination, which is very well known in Africa as well, then it starts to be a very different situation. It is something which is almost like a given nowadays. And as I said, the phone is your mirror. What happened on the way whilst building these networks, that was sometimes not always ethical, because wherever there is a lot of money at stake, and I've given an example also in the book, where we have to take a decision about buying network elements, that is the core network and the radio network and transmission, etc., for GSM. And then someone rings me up like 1 o'clock in the morning and says, if you vote for us, then it will be very good for you. Now you put the phone down. Yeah, but things like that happen. And that happens all the time because it's not about millions, it's about minimum hundreds of millions. And nowadays, of course, billions. So wherever there's a lot of money at stake, you will have to consider how to deal with those situations, because people will try and bribe you. There will be corruption. There will be people who try to basically take a certain way of getting money on the side, and this world is not without very many problems in that respect.
Yeah, no, that's clear. And then it's also so, but if we look at the changed world, so you've been in ex-communist countries in the Western world, you know a lot about what's happening in countries like India, but also here on the African continent. So if we speak about the mobile revolution changing the world, and our first ethical principles looking at how does a technology or computing contribute to society and to human well-being, you know, when you acknowledge that all people are stakeholders. Do you think that mobile has also assisted in bridging the digital divide that we also spoke about?
Yeah, of course. I mean, you know, the digital divide is there. We have to acknowledge that. And then one of the things, of course, is, you know, in the past, there was no fixed line, so you couldn't connect to anything at all. And now, of course, we have mobile internet. But then there is still an issue of what we discussed before, namely that there is a gap. And that gap is not always because people don't have a phone. It is like in some rural areas, it's very difficult or too expensive to build. There's no customers. So you cannot build a base station that costs in between $250,000 and $1 million for a cow and a hare. Yeah, it's impossible. And for the pass-by. So there are still in this world, of course, gaps of coverage. That is number one. Two, even if you have the coverage, then does a family have enough money to afford more than one phone? And what happens then with that one phone? Very often, I'm sorry to say, but it is the case, and there's a lot of study done. It goes to the male member of the family, and whereas I have to say, on the other hand, there's a lot of countries, of course, where the women do trade. Yeah, if we look at Uganda, I know for sure that coffee is grown by women and not by men. So, you know, why is that? There's a cultural background, of course. And then the third factor is, okay, I am in the coverage and I do have a phone and I can use my phone, but what does it cost to use the data? Yeah, so there are several very important elements there that you have to consider.
Yes. Yeah, and so that's you know, across the world, and because this is also a Women in IT chapter webinar, we briefly had a look at what's happening with the gender gap, and this is information that comes from the GMSA, as you said before, where people can find it, and you see that in low and income middle countries. There is still a gap when you look at the ratio of women using the mobile internet.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And of course, the GSMA is doing a lot of research, but not only research. Nowadays, they also run a lot of projects in order to try and help. Yeah, especially if there is coverage, then what can you do to help women to have a phone and to use that phone? And there is also another aspect to it. I was helping here a startup in Uganda, and then you see that women who older than about 35, 40 years old, they can't read. So you can have a smartphone, but if you can't read, that is still not helpful. So there are so many components in this story.
Sure. Yeah, and I agree with you. So Vanessa, I see your question. Is it okay? Because I think we'll come across that a bit later in the webinar. Is it okay if I address that a bit later? because I first wanted to have a look at the next stage in Ineke's journey. When she went from Western Europe onto, as it's called in her book, the Islamic world. Well, on this map, you can't see the countries that clearly, but the first posting was in Kosovo, which at that time was under UN transition control. I don't know how you call that, after the Kosovo war. From then you went on to Lebanon, another part of the world which is quite volatile, where you stayed for about 4 years. So that means, and we'll come back to that later, you were also there during the 2006 Lebanon war. And after that, you had your posting in Azerbaijan. So you already hinted a bit at, ethical principles. So where you said that you were phoned by somebody from the suppliers who was offering a bribe. But if we look at the number of the countries that you've worked in, so let me see. So most of them are actually listed on the in the mid to lower levels on the corruption index that is published by the organization called transparency.org. So, so you've in your book you share not just that example of the gentleman, but you share a couple of other examples as well. But how do you, as a leader, and that's looking at ethical leadership principles, you're faced by corruption and fraud, both from within and coming outside of the company. How do you, as a leader, make sure that there's ethical behavior within the companies that you're responsible for?
Well, the first thing, of course, you set the example. Eh? So whatever you do, you are the example. And if you are open for all kinds of nonsense, then your people will be open to come to that as well. So it is, it's a very nice one. When the boss sneezes, the company is sick. When the boss accepts bribes, the company is corrupt. Yeah, so that is how it goes. So you are the example. And what we've done, what I've done in many of the countries, is to, of course, adopt also a code of ethics in the company. And for example, if you work in the Middle East, then it is usual and normal to give huge presents, and that is already debatable, because you can give a huge present to one member of personnel and someone else doesn't get anything, so it creates also jealousy. So one of the first things I've introduced is like, okay, you get a present over a X amount of money, let's say $50 or $100, you have to notify HR, and then it goes into the kitty, and then this is almost auctioned off, or in a lottery at the Christmas party. So everyone knows, this present is coming in. This is how it goes. And if the present comes into my office, I buy it from the kitty. Or I had once a golden watch with a lot of diamonds, and I sent it back. Yeah, but I make sure that if I do that, I make it very visible that I do it, because you have to make a statement and set an example. And if you just put it in the post and no one knows, that's not helpful. You have to make sure that people understand that that is how you lead, and then it works mostly.
Okay, and
So
other elements that you describe, what's relevant within an organization is making sure,
Absolutely, yeah. So if you have an organization like when I went to Azerbaijan, the history of the company was, too much to explain now, but it came down to the fact that hardly anyone had a contract. There were like 250 job descriptions flying around and titles. In the mobile company, you don't have more than 50 to 60, max 70 job description, because a customer care rep is a customer care rep and a field engineer is a field engineer, right? So they can have a different, levels of salary because they have more experience or less experience, but it doesn't change the job title. So one of the things you need to do is to make sure that you create calm. Yeah? And how can you create calm and people's loyal and get people's loyalty for that and make sure that they don't do funny things, is to make sure that they have a basis that they can work from. So they have a proper job description, they have a proper contract, and that is security. And in a lot of countries, security, of course, is very, very important. So that creates already a basis. Then the next thing is that if you see that the grandmother reports to the grandson and the nephew to the niece, that you have to break that. Yeah, I am not a fan of these things. And even if there's not too much personnel around, you still have to reshuffle it. There cannot be reporting lines between family members or friends. So that is another policy that you have to put in place. And then, but you have to realize though, if you put that policy in place, that there are certain processes, and these processes are person to person. These processes have to be documented. So one of the first things I did there in Azerbaijan is to hire a very experienced process engineer that he could set up a whole project throughout the whole company, 3D, if you will, yeah, holistic, and mapping all the processes in special tools that we have for that. Now, the minute that you make stuff objective, yeah, and measurable, that is the minute where all these hanky-panky businesses are basically not relevant anymore. But you do have to be very aware of what you are doing, because if you can give them another job, then it's okay. But if you fire them because the process, this person is really not necessary, so let him go or her go, then you have to find another way for this person to survive. So one of the most important things is, before you start hiring and firing, think of the consequences of what you do. Yeah. And if you fire, think about how can we make sure that there is, in the West they call it outsourcing or overcomplete or all kinds of terms like that. But I would say make sure that there is some money on the side so that they can at least survive. Yeah, because national security systems, as you are also aware, I'm sure, are not widely spread throughout the world at a level that people can live off. Yeah, or only for a very short time. So another way of doing that is to say, okay, let's support micro enterprises, let's support startups, let's do that sort of thing. And then if it is in the technology area, quite often you see then that they become a little or a small supplier to the company, but they are very grateful, and and that is something that you need, because you need loyalty in the company to have calm and to make sure that little hanky-panky stuff is going on, but also outside the company, because the word of mouth is always, wherever you are in the world, still the strongest. And if you as a company support your employees and your ex-employees, if of course they are worth doing that, because not the persons that are trying to rip you off. But if you do that, you will see that this calms down the whole situation. And I think that is very important. And I've done that in Kosovo, I've done it in Azerbaijan, I've done it in many countries, and it works.
Okay, great, thank you. I'm looking at the time and considering the topics we still want to discuss. I wanted to move on to the next topic. So after your postings, and I just want to make this comment, we don't have time to really go into it, but like I said, I know Ineke, and I know because we've been speaking every now and again over the years, I know she's had her postings in Kosovo and in Lebanon, but I never realized exactly under the kind of danger that you lived under. And I really highly recommend reading the book, because it makes for interesting but also quite grueling reading. And maybe and this actually takes me back to the roundtable from yesterday with regard to load shedding and how do you prepare for volatile times, because actually that's what you had to do in Lebanon, and especially where you had to make sure that the network stayed operational. So maybe very briefly, what would you advise CEOs how they should deal in volatile times, you know, because we're not just, you know, facing war in our world, like currently in Ukraine, but also on our continent in Sudan and in the DRC, but also, you know, impending climate disasters, and possibly very close to home in South Africa, total grid collapse. Can you very briefly share a bit about that?
Yeah, of course. I think, you know, if we take the example of Lebanon, yeah, I was there for nearly 5 years actually, but halfway we had the Israeli Lebanese, well, basically Hezbollah war. Yeah. But before that, before 2006, already in 2004 and 5, there was this business of bird flu. And I looked at that and I thought by myself, wait a minute, if this is going to happen, what do we do? Yeah, so I started to do and also because we were living in a volatile area anyway, because there were always assassination of politicians and journalists, etc. And I thought that this can go a bit further than that. So let's prepare, not only for the bird flu. But I had a clinic and a doctor in my company, and I spoke to her, and she basically said to me, well, you know, if you go to the World Health Organization, where she had a role there, I think on the board for Lebanon or something, then there is a sort of idea of how you develop a plan like that. And that plan is in 5 steps. So I tasked a task group, yeah, to investigate in the company the 5 levels. And the 5 levels is from, it starts a bit icky until full-fledged war. Yeah. And what is it? And also for a pandemic, like, the bird flu or COVID. Yeah, what happens? Because you cannot touch people anymore. You cannot come close by people. You have to take your distance, etc. So how do you do your business in situations like that? That is then an illness, but with a bomb, it's a bomb. Yeah, it's quite definite. But so we basically have the task force. I said you have half a year to develop this, and I want to see the outcome of that. And I want to see how we look at these World Health Organization standards and transform them into our disaster plan. So the plan was built on the fact that, you know, a totally fine situation where 100% of personnel works, nothing the matter, right? That's phase 1. That is phase 0. Phase 1 is there is something going on, yeah, a flood or something else. Then people who work in that area, they can't come to the company, so you lose a few people. And it goes all the way to the critical people. Without critical people, you have nothing anymore, because nothing will work. A mobile network doesn't work by itself. Yeah, it needs a lot of engineers, of course, but not only the engineers. How do you distribute in those days SIM cards? How you distribute airtime or data or whatever to your clients? So all these things were mapped, and everyone knew, and also we trained them. Well, that means, you know, evacuate the building in 5 seconds. You know, what do you need if you're sick? Yeah, so we had supplies of medicine, of water, of cookies, and some stretchers for the critical people, and so on and so forth. And also think in advance that what happens if, because a mobile operation cannot say, and certainly I can't say, you know, that's enough, I don't want to do this anymore. Yeah, that's impossible, of course, because if there's anything important in a war situation, then it is communication. Because there's communications, you also save a lot of lives. Yeah, people who fall under the rubble, how do you save them? They have a mobile, luckily. Yeah, and we can find them. So all these things, where there was a big exercise going on. So not only the plan, but also rehearsals. And I think that is of very critical importance, that a company that is, you have to have foresight of what could happen. And you have to run what if scenarios. And if you don't do that and you're just complacent and think, oh, the world turns very nice around the sun, or the sun around the world, whatever. Yeah, that is not how it works.
No.
You have, even in a calm situation, you have to do this.
Okay, great.
That is how we did it.
Yes.
Yeah.
No, wonderful. So after that volatile the postings in the Islamic world, you then moved on to a maybe not less volatile area in the Caribbean, to Haiti, where you were in 2013 as interim CEO for Digicel. So I can imagine that must have been an interesting experience. And once again, I like to refer to Ineke's book about that. But so
yeah, I was
sorry?
not an interim. I was not an interim CEO. I was just a CEO, and I quit.
Okay.
And one of the reasons I quit was because there was a lot of challenges in Haiti, but because you think that you've seen it all, the wars in Kosovo and Lebanon, and even before that Croatia and so on. But the Haiti was a very different, very, very different challenge, and a very, very, very dangerous place for me to be. So I had 2 bodyguards, but lots of and lots of weapons, and I was living in a compound, and I couldn't step outside the compound, not one step, and I had an armored car, and so on and so forth. So if you are running a company, in this case, of a turnover of well over $500 million a year, then you are basically number 1 on the island to be kidnapped, for example. Yeah.
Okay.
So that is the danger there. That's a different danger. But again,
Yes.
it's a very serious danger. And the other danger is, of course, that in a volatile situation, and that country is run by gangs, yeah, not by governments. There are gangs there. So they want the cream of the companies that are making some turnover. And so I had to deal with a lot of corruption in that particular place. One of the reasons I quit.
Okay.
And I am used.
Yeah.
And I can say I'm used to everything, but it can be too much.
Okay.
And certainly if you're ill as well.
Yes.
So anyway,
No.
yeah.
No, I can imagine. And that's also, then it's probably looking also at your own internal ethical compass and say, when's enough? And when do I have to leave? Yeah.
That is the lesson that not only I, but a lot of my colleagues. You have to understand that there's less than 1,000 CEOs in the world, in my world. And from the less than 1,000 CEOs, about half of them, like myself, don't work for anyone. We are hired as a hired gun. So since 97, I work for myself. And that is about half of them. And these people are always working in situations like that. The lesson that we have learned, my partners as well, because I am working with partners, ex-CEOs as well, is that you have to quit when you think it's time to quit, and don't linger, because then it gets really dangerous. So that is why I left Haiti when I left Haiti. I had learned my lesson.
Okay, no, I understand. Okay, I want to move on to the topic, and which is also specifically of interest to our members who are ICT professionals. So, because throughout the book, and I think that's from the beginning of the mobile revolution until today, one of the main huge, gigantic challenges is to make sure that to find the right trained and experienced professionals to work for you. So maybe you can give me our audience a quick understanding of the kind of technical jobs that you have within a mobile operator that you always need, and then share with us how you dealt with while being faced with the scarcity of professionals that you need. Because let's not forget, and I think you will pick that up if you look at the networks you've built or the tasks you have. Like you said, you're a hired gun, you come in within 2 years, something needs to be built, organized, networks need to be doubled or quadrupled. How do you go about it? You know, what are the jobs you're looking for, and how do you go about making sure that you've got the capacity in your company to get the work done?
Yeah. Okay, well, the first thing is, of course, if you look at purely technical, right? In the technical environment, you have the core network. So you need switching engineers, you need engineers who can manage the NOC, the Network Operations Center, on a 24/7 basis. That is your James Bond screens, where you can see all the traffic and how you can do traffic rerouting and all that sort of stuff. So these are very specialized NOC engineers. Then you have, of course, the value-added platforms. You have the testing engineers. You have integration engineers, especially now with all the apps that are now running on the mobile network. And there needs to be an integration, of course. There needs to be testing done. Then, if you look at the radio network, then you have your radio engineers, which are gold dust. Yeah, it's very difficult to come by, very expensive as well. And then you have your transmission engineers. Transmission engineers are, you know, transmission engineers are specialized in microwave transmission. They're fiber, they're copper. They are nowadays we look also at satellite, of course. So these are different breeds, if you will. Then you have your whole IT infrastructure. And you have, of course, the services that you offer to especially large clients. And then you have, for that, you have pre-sales engineers that they go with commercial to the client to understand what it is that they need for their company. So that is another, on the commercial side, the ones that are looking in the company itself. What is the IT infrastructure in the company? And that everyone has a computer, of course. But also the call center. Quite often you have 700 people working in the call center in shifts, but they need to be able to log on to the system. Yeah, so that again is a special requirement. But most importantly, if you look at the communication between the technical part and the commercial part of the company, I already mentioned pre-sales engineers, for example, but also business analysts. Yeah, because we have all kinds of platforms, and those platforms, I get information out those platforms with queries, of course, if you have a management information system running, and that is very, very important in order to take decisions. So you have business analysts. They can query those platforms and come up with suggestions, and business analysts, still today, there are not many of them, so we need much more of them, because the translation between what people want and what people need technically, how that needs to be done, is very crucial. Then another one that is very crucial is, of course, security. Yeah, not only physical security, because a mobile operation has hundreds of people running around physical security, but system security. So you need, let's say, the good hackers. Yeah, I normally hire a couple of hackers to test the network to see, to see how safe the network itself is. Yeah, from a transmission point of view, from a data point of view, etc. But also to see if the traffic that is generated, and then you generate call data records. They're read in by media gateway. This media gateway is connected to the billing system, is connected to the customer care system, etc. Is that, is that flow, 100% secure? So you need operational audits to see if the money doesn't walk out of the door, because quite often it does walk out of the door via all kinds of tricks. Yeah, but you need these people. And if you look at that as an example, let's say in Azerbaijan, with 2.5 million subscribers, in those days, it's not a very big country, of course, and we're talking about, what is it now, about 13 years ago. But then the technical department, so the telecom part and the IT part together is the CTO area, as we call it, still had about 450 people working there. And all these people have very high qualifications. Now, if you can't get them, then there is a circus around the world where you can go to, and especially in the UK, there are many, many contracting firms where you can hire those people. So whilst saying that, we had 450, but quite a lot of those were international people. coming from all over the world to help with this particular project. Project finished, they go to the next country, same as with me. Yeah, it is a circus. But these people are highly specialized and, of course, also have the task to hand over this knowledge and experience to the youngsters. So from that point of view, I would say I would always try to hire young engineers, not only because these young engineers have up-to-date knowledge, at least on an educational level. At the same time, build a training center of make sure that you have your training in order so that the practical side of that theoretical knowledge is there and can be, it's very important, yeah, that they learn it the way the company wants it and not that they go elsewhere. So make sure that you stay with the company. Yeah, and we make sure that you stay with the company. In order to do that, we spent a lot of money on the whole. The specialized engineers, probably $20,000 a year just in training. But on the other hand, they have to sign a declaration that they will stay with the company, of course, because it's a high investment. And so there are all kinds of ways of, trying to fill these gaps, if you will. Yeah, but if you have to, you will get them from an international contracting company, and there are quite a few in the world.
Okay, thank you. And then, some examples. I'm looking at the time, so we're nearing the end of the hour. And what I also wanted to chat about, because I know you've always worked a lot also by getting involved with the education system in the countries that you were posted in. And especially also in South Africa, but also I think in other African countries. So maybe in closing off, this is a nice example, and I know people in the audience would be interested in that, because we do find that we have less learners coming out of high school with the relevant STEM skills, as we call them. So the question is a bit, how do we make these young people in schools excited about pursuing a technical career, so that we make sure that at least, we have enough people at the beginning of the pipeline that could come out at a later point?
Yeah, well, again, I would like to go back to Azerbaijan, because from an HR perspective, that was really a very good example, if you will. Yeah. So when I came, there was 1,500 people. They don't have a contract. They don't have a job description. They don't, etc. Only that exercise in itself, of course, takes months to organize. But with the task, as a hired can, I have a task. I need to quadruple the network. What does that mean in personnel? Yeah, how do you do that? But how do you do that today? We just discussed. How do you do it tomorrow? So I am very interested in education for children, always been. So I went and I was on the board of Junior Achievements, which is probably also well known in South Africa. I wasn't aware of these things because I'm a pure commercial person, but I did my research and I was asked, actually, that was very nice, to go on the board. Now we pay money for that, logically, but the benefit of that was that in a country where everyone is only looking at oil, because it's an oil country, and no one is really looking at telecommunications, but telecommunications is contributing $1.5 billion, annually. You must have a view on how you do that. So with Junior Achievements, I developed a program whereby teenagers could come in to the company, and we developed a whole training program for teenagers. And the teenagers, they loved it. So I said, okay, you are the assistant of this and this person in the company, and you run with this person. And next week you do that one and that one and that one. So you run through all the company. And then at the end, you're going to tell me as a person, how did you like this? And at the same time, I told them, you all work together and you write the mobile handbook for youngsters, for teenagers. So of course the heads of departments who were in charge of that program, they mostly wrote it, but together with the children, and also with tests and things like that. So when that program was finished, and we did it ongoingly, these kids were so enthusiastic about mobile communications that immediately they start to tell their friends, etc., etc. So you start from a very young age to create an interest. I had a similar program with ISAC. I know that you know that as well. And the reason for that was because we were a standalone mobile operation, we are not part of a group. Because within a group, you do a lot of exchange. Yeah? You send people to a country. There's Vodafone, for example. I have Vodafone. I'm in many, many countries. And I say, okay, you go to the Ukraine now, and you go to, I don't know, let's say the Czech Republic, and you go to Belgium or wherever. Yeah, that's a way for big companies to do that. But if you are not one of those groups, you can do it in a different way. So I took ISAC on board and make sure that they expanded in Azerbaijan. But my condition was that even though my candidates already were graduates and not students anymore, that I wanted them in the exchange programs. Because ISAC has exchange programs all over the world as well, and also a lot with telecommunications. So you need to think outside the box always. And at the same token, I tasked someone to build a training center where we could train 200 people per day, all 24 hours if necessary. Yeah, because you need a lot of training. If you look at the budget, I mean, telcos in the Western world will probably, I don't know, allocate about 2.5%, yeah, of the payroll to training, but I allocate 7 to 8% to training. That's a very different. And that is the reason for that is that you want to create this base for the future. But you start very young. That's my point. I like to start very young.
Okay. I hear what you say. So that's amazing. And I hope that also speaks to people in the audience. Huh? So we're looking at a strong HR function for recruitment. We're looking at the responsibility for international contractors who come in to hand over their skills to local personnel. It's your training and also start them young. Okay, so we're officially at the end of the time of the webinar.